Hello? Oh, we're on. This is great.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. My name is Igor Minar, and I'm here with Misko Hevery.
Nice to meet you all. I mean, thank you all for coming. Wow, what a full room. This is exciting.
So we came to talk to you about AngularJS because that's the project we are working on. And with AngularJS, we think that you can think differently about what browser does for you and how browser works and how can you use this when developing web applications. So everybody knows here what a browser is? Nobody? Everybody? Yeah, we all do. We use browsers every day. We spend a ton of time in them. But have you ever thought about what browsers used to look like a couple of years ago? You know, it wasn't that long ago when browsers looked something like this. They were very simple. And more importantly, the content they used to display was very simple, static, and quite frankly boring. It's amazing that when you look at the browsers today, they look very different. They're much more advanced. And the content you can access through them is also much more advanced. It's very interactive. And we can do all of our calendaring, emailing, talking to friends, sharing pictures, doing research, studying, or even just wasting time online in browsers.
Don't forget Angry Birds.
Angry Birds, yeah. So, craziest of all, we can run a full-blown IDE right there in the browser. I never thought this would have been possible, but Cloud9 proved me wrong. And if you go to Cloud9, you can develop in your browser. So, I'm very happy about the current state of affairs, especially as a user, because there's all this rich content, there are all these applications, and I can do quite a lot online. But I can't say the same as a developer. And the reason why I'm not happy as a developer is that there's a lot of complexity that I have to be dealing with when building these applications. And as you probably know, complexity kills. Complexity kills innovation, complexity kills creativity, and creates this barrier between you and the user you're trying to build this awesome app for. Now, you might be wondering, what is this complexity? Like, I build applications and I know that it's not easy, but let's illustrate it on a simple example. Let's build a hello world with a static HTML and then rebuild it with JavaScript. So with static HTML, all you have to say, hey browser, please render paragraph and set the content of this paragraph to be hello world. Notice this is very declarative. You're not telling the browser how to do it. You're telling the browser, this is the end result I want you to give me. And it's up to you to figure out how you get to it. Now let's re-implement this with JavaScript. And it's going to look something like this.
Wow, that's scary, man.
It is scary, yes. I'm not going to go through this crazy code, but it should suffice to say that this is one of the ugliest hello world examples in the history of languages, programming languages. Now, what do you have to do in order to build this hello world application? You have to understand how browser works, what kind of events are going on in the browser, how to register listeners for these events, how to do DOM manipulation in response to these events, and you also need to know differences between the browser and how to work around them. Hello, IE. And worst of all, this is not a declarative description of the end result. This is a sequence of steps the browser should take in order to get you to hello world. And the hello world is really just a side effect of taking these steps. So I used to build applications in this way, and I always felt like I was dealing with black magic, like I was tricking the browser into doing something for me rather than just having it help me build applications. Anybody remembers how we used to do rounded corners before we had border radius? You know, all these nested divs and all the background images? Now, that was just crazy. That was tricking a browser. You couldn't express what you wanted to do. You had to use these tricks to get the end result. Now, fortunately, CSS has improved quite a lot. And we have border radius and other ways to express what we want the browser to do for us. But I don't see the same kind of improvements being done in HTML or DOM APIs. So, but you might want to say, hey, I'm a jQuery ninja or I'm a Clojure ninja, and everything's good. I don't deal with browser inconsistencies, and it's reasonably okay to build applications. Well, unfortunately, all the solutions are imperative. It's, again, the sequence of steps you need to take. You cannot declaratively specify what you want the browser to do for you. And if you think about it, these libraries or these solutions shouldn't have existed if the browser APIs were sane, were implemented consistently across all the browsers. And also, these solutions don't really help you then don't add new abstractions, don't give you new building blocks to build applications in an easier way. It's the same abstraction level, it just looks better, it's just a syntactic sugar. The solution I'm looking for is declarative. I want to be able to do something like with my hello world, the static page, where I just declaratively specify what I want the browser to do. But I want to make this possible for dynamic applications rather than just static pages. And it turns out that data binding and declarative templating really helps with this situation. So, I guess that many of you are familiar with data binding, especially if you have WPF or Flex background. But for those of you that don't know much about it, it's very simple. You have a model, which is something domain-specific to your application, and you bind this model to a template, and you let the templating engine generate views for you. So in this case, I have a very simple model with a profile of Tony Stark, and I bound it to 2 templates and generated 2 views. Now, the interesting part about this is that this is not a one-time interpolation. This is not just producing the view one time. This is this live system where if I modify the model, the templating engine will observe this change and will update the view for me automatically. I don't need to go and update the view every time the model changes. And it also works the other way around. So if you have the two-way data binding and you bind the model to the form, like I have in the second view, if the user starts interacting with the form and starts changing the form content, these changes will be propagated automatically to the model. And because I have a second view bound to the same model, these changes will then go back to the second view where it will be just reflected automatically. So what do you get out of this? These spreadsheet-like updates. Just like in spreadsheet, you have dependencies between cells and formulas, and everything just recalculates. It's the same thing. It can get even more advanced if you start dealing with collections and arrays. So let's say I have an array of 3 superheroes, and I bind it to a template using a repeating construct. What I'm telling the templating engine is to iterate over all of the elements in the array and stamp out a new copy of this template for each element in the array and bind this element to this instance of the template. What you get out of that is a list of superheroes. And again, this is not just one-time thing. When you push a new object into this array, or when you remove object or update existing object, this will be automatically reflected in your view. You don't have to do anything. So we see that with this data binding, we can really remove a lot of JavaScript code from your application. Because when you look at a typical application, about 70 to 80% of all the JavaScript code is really just about synchronizing the model with the view and keeping and propagating changes from the view to the model. And if all this can go away, it really reduces the code in your application. And if you look at the code, it's really the code that is really hard to test. And we'll talk about testability a lot. So what we did with AngularJS, we taught browser how to do data binding. It's implemented in JavaScript using existing APIs, and it's available in all the browsers you might want to use today, including IE8, mobile browsers, and set-top boxes. We also think that data binding is so awesome that it should be part of the platform. And we're working with a group at Google that is in charge of creating specification for browser vendors called model-driven views. And the goal of this specification is to bring data binding natively to the browser. And we are hoping that this is going to be available in all the browsers in the near future. So while data binding can remove a lot of JavaScript code from your application, HTML itself can be really verbose sometimes. Let's take a very simple example. Let's take an example of tabs. So these are tabs generated using Bootstrap, Twitter Bootstrap CSS framework. And in order to generate a simple component like this, I have to go to Twitter Bootstrap website, and I need to copy and paste this chunk of HTML into my HTML template. And I need to find where I need to put my content, and then Twitter Bootstrap will just make it look like tabs. Now, this is not ideal. Again, I feel like I'm tricking the browser. I'm not telling it to render tabs. I'm telling it to render these random divs and LIs and ULs. And as a side effect, I get something that looks like tabs. And also, it's not very maintainable because you need to copy-paste it all over the place. When the template changes, you need to go to all these places and change it. Not ideal. So what I want is, in my HTML template, I just want to specify custom elements. I want to tell browser, hey, browser, just render tabs. And I want these tabs to have 2 panes, and each pane will have a title. and you figure out what the DOM structure, underlying DOM structure needs to be generated in order to make it look like tabs. This is something that we allow you to build with AngularJS, and we call these things reusable components. And it's not just tabs. Just think about all these components that you could build using this feature, and then share it in your application. And these components, you know, they can be very simple and stateless, or they can be complicated and stateful. It's really, really up to you. So reusable components in AngularJS we're implementing using existing DOM and JavaScript APIs, and they work across all the browsers, including IE, HTML browsers, and so on. And again, we think that this is a really cool feature because it adds new abstraction to the platform, and it should be part of the platform. And that's why we're working with a group that is in charge of creating specification and implementing specification called Web Components. And this specification will bring native capabilities so that you can build these reusable components with just native APIs. And if you are a hacker, you can actually get nightly builds of Chrome and WebKit and start playing with parts of the specification because it's already been implemented. So Angular is not just about templating. We think about the whole story, you know, how to build applications with current browsers and do it in a way that feels like the browser. Just smarter. And we're going to see examples of that as we build a simple application right now with Misko.
Who wants to see some code? Yes, okay, and the rest of you, what? Too lazy to raise your hands? So before we jump into code, I'm going to do a little detour, a little bit of marketing. First of all, we have this awesome website where you can find a lot more information. And the most important part of the website is right here, saying that if you're a JS ninja and would like to become a superhero, which all of us secretly do, click on that link so that we can hire you. This website goes through all the important parts, the basics, the controllers, and most of the things we're going to cover today, so I'm not going to go through it again. Also, we have this amazing other site which shows all of the wonderful things that have been built with AngularJS. Please browse around. Two of the ones we are most proud of are the YouTube, which actually runs on PlayStation 3, and also DoubleClick for advertisers that actually is making some money for Google. But if you have a cool app that you would like to share, please follow the instructions on the site and share it over here so that we can see what amazing stuff you're already building with it. And now we are going to jump into some coding.
So what are we going to build?
You know, it's kind of a tradition to build a to-do app. So we're going to build a to-do app, and as you can see, it's
Wait, why does it say Igor's to-do list?
Because you're my minion.
What? That's not true. I have plenty of stuff to do.
I know, and I'm going to give you more. But you know what? I'll give you some minions later on, so it'll be okay.
Okay.
So let me give you a little background, first of all. This is just a very simple web server here, which is just running on localhost 8000, and it's serving this static document that's inside of the IDE. There's no server-side thing going on whatsoever. It's pure, good old static HTML server. So to help out, we added Bootstrap Css to make our demo look presentable. And we also added Angular and Angular resource. And I've been paying attention to what Igor was saying, and he was using double curlies everywhere. So I'm going to do that too. I'm going to say user name so that maybe if we get somebody else to replace Igor, we can change it easily.
Do you want to replace me already?
Yeah. No, well, no, not yet. But I'm just saying you're complaining that it's your list, so maybe we can give it to somebody else. Okay. Anyways, I hit refresh, and I see this username in here. What's going on? I thought this was supposed to be magical.
Yes, it is. But browsers, they don't know how to do data binding just yet. We are on the way to teaching them how to do it. But for now, you have to use Angular, and you have to tell Angular that this is an Angular application. So even though we loaded Angular, Angular is inactive. It's waiting for you to tell it, hey, this is an Angular application. Just start with the magic and turn it into an application. So the way we do it, we add a custom attribute, ng-app, anywhere in the document. And by anywhere, I mean element that is root of the application. So because this is a very simple application and it's really, there's nothing else on the page, we're just going to place it on the HTML tag.
So I highlighted the two pieces that are important. So we are creating this thing called a module, which we'll talk about in a second. And as long as the two items match, we have an application, right? Right.
So what you're telling in Angular is that, hey, there is an Angular application. It starts at the HTML tag. And in order to bootstrap the application, you need a to-do app module, which contains definitions of all the components that our application is composed of.
Okay, so the double curlies of username disappeared, but now I don't have anything. What's going on?
Okay, so Angular bootstrapped, it found double curlies, but it doesn't know anything about the model. So it doesn't know where username model comes from, so that's why there's nothing in there. So we need to define a place where this model will live. And in Angular, model lives on a scope that is defined in a controller. So we need a controller to have a place, a context where this model will live.
Let me guess, ng controller?
Yes. So we're going to place ng controller on an element, and everything within this element, all of the children of this body, will be in the context of this application controller. So, and then we go back to our todo.js, and within our todo app module, we're going to define a new controller. It's going to be called app controller.
Okay, I got that. What is this app scope?
Okay, so the controller is defined through a constructor function, and the constructor function takes one argument right now, which is a scope. So think of scope as a context that is shared between the controller and the template, and everything available on the scope is then available to templating, so you can data bind to it.
I get it. So the scope acts kind of like the glue between the view and the code.
Yes. So you can even call it a view model if you want.
Okay, and it came up with Igor.
Right. So because you said scope.username and you signed string Igor to it, now Angular knows what the double curly Igor, the double curly username means, and it can pull the data and show it in the view.
Okay, so there's a list of items here, task 1, task 2. I would like to actually create a model for that and data bind it. So I'm guessing I'm going to create var items and then just make an array of things?
Well, yeah, we can start with a wow, you typed really fast.
Thank you. It's one of the superpowers.
So we can just create this in-memory model that is just a plain old array that contains some objects. Each object has some properties, and these properties are text, and done, and minion. So we're going to take this model and we're going to publish it on the scope. And
so
then you want to display it as it is?
I'm going to data bind it because I think magic should happen and it should just do it, but it's not doing exactly what I want. What's going on?
Well, this is what you said. You just said display this array, so Angular is just displaying the array.
So what I want is I want to iterate over the array. So help me out here. What do I do?
Okay, so we have this list of LIs. And what you really want, you just want a template. You want a single template that will be used over and over for each element in the array.
So I want to repeat it?
Yes.
And you repeat?
Yes. So we're going to use ng-repeat, another directive or another custom attribute, and we're just going to say item in items. And what this is going to do is it's going to tell Angular, hey, look at the items array and see how many items there are and stamp out as many copies of the li as there are items in the array.
That's awesome. I think I can take it from here. So I'll use data binding again. We have 2 items. I think there's other things in there, such as item.done, and I can display that as well. But you know, I would like to check this guy. Since this is done, the true should be checked in over here. What's going on over here?
Right. So we have this input box, but the input box is just inert. It's not bound to anything, so we need to bind it. But as opposed to what we did before with double curlies, we need to establish two-way data binding, so that the changes from the view propagate to the model, and also from the model propagate to the view. The way you can do that is through ng-model, which takes an expression and you just point it to item.done, because that's the property in the item.
Very nice. So here's the true test of spreadsheet-like behavior. Is it going to change if I click? And it does! That's amazing. I like this. This is already exciting. Thank you. You can clap. Yes. So this is awesome. We have true. You know what? Let's take it up a notch. How about we do a strike through across it? Okay.
So with Angular, you can data bind directly to any of the element attributes. We have this CSS rule in a todo.css, which says whenever you see done true class, just make it look like it strikes through. So we're just going to define a class, and we're going to do done dash and data bind to item.done. This is just going to update the class of this li, which is going to give us the effect of element being crossed through.
That's very exciting. So let's take care of this thing on the top over here. So let's see. I think I can do some of it. So this is easy, right? Because we're just going to say items.length, because length is a property of an array, so we get that over there.
Yep.
But what about the remaining part? That's a little more complicated. How do we solve that one?
So native array in JavaScript has no knowledge of our domain-specific functionality, like calculating how many items are done or not done. So we need to create something custom for our application. We need to create this computed property, and let's just call it remaining, and just call it just like any other function.
Remaining? Where does that come from?
Well, let's go to the controller, and if you scroll down, I actually implemented this already for you.
I see. So you placed it on a scope, and because it's on a scope and it acts as a glue, it's visible to the view.
Exactly. So now you can just define the function, and what the function does, it just iterates over the array using the native reduce method, and it will just calculate how many items are done and not done and return a number. And then this number is used to display the remaining count in our view.
But is it going to update? It does.
Yeah, that's how it should work.
Very nice. So it's kind of amazing that I don't have to really tell it anything. I basically hook up pieces and it just does what it's supposed to do.
Yeah, and that's the power of declarative templating. You know, you should be able to express these relationships between things in your template, and then put a lot of your logic or all of your logic into controllers in JavaScript and just invoke them from the template when you need it.
Okay, how about this archive guy?
That's a very good example of logic that needs to be done in the controller.
Okay, so how do I call that logic?
So we have a link, which is right now not doing anything, and we want to register a click listener. So in Angular, we do it through ng-click.
You mean like on-click?
It's very different from on-click. On-click actually forces you to put everything into the window, into the global context. So when you want to evaluate anything on on-click, you have to publish it to the window. And this makes things really messy, really hard to maintain. And also, any of the expressions in on-click are being evalved. So that's a security concern. ng-click, as opposed to on-click, will evaluate this expression in the context of the scope, in the context of this controller, and we are not evaluating anything. We are actually interpreting the expression you are asking us to execute.
So again, I see that you have already prepared a method for me, archive,
right,
which seems to be very simple. It just runs through the array and kicks out any object that is not done.
Exactly. We're just going to create new array, and this array will contain only those items that are not done yet.
And I see that changing that updates it. So this is an interesting point, because it means that if I want to add or remove items from the DOM, I don't get a hold of the DOM and manipulate the DOM. Instead, I just get a hold of the underlying model, right? The underlying array in this case. And by manipulating the array, it actually manipulates the DOM kind of indirectly.
Yeah, so you have this model that is driving the view. So you don't change the view yourself, you change the model, and then these changes to the model then propagate to the view. And using the declarative constructs in the template will just do the right thing to the view.
All right, but it's time for doing something more complicated. We have this form over here, and clearly it can't be that easy to hook up the form, because you have to have all kinds of listeners and things. So what I would like to do is, if I say sudo make me a sandwich, I would like it to add, like nothing's happening here.
Okay, so let's look at the template.
Okay.
So we see that currently the template is just a form that has one input box and one button. And they are not data bound, they don't do anything.
Okay,
so
I know. I'm going to use ng model, right?
Yeah, you already know how to do a data binding. And let's just bind it to a new item.txt, which is just this model that we're going to create specifically for this form.
And for the button, I'm going to call ng-click.
Yes.
And I am going to call an add method passing a new item. And of course, where is the add method? It's right here.
Pretty good. So yeah, again, when you click on the button, this will invoke functionality in the controller. So the template contains only the hook into the controller, and all of the logic is then present in the controller. And the logic is, again, very simple. We're just taking this new item that we get from the form, and we create a new object out of it with the text property set to whatever the input box contained, and done property set to false by default. And then we're going to take this object and we're just going to push it to the items array that we already have. And at the end, we're going to clear the new item.txt so that when you submit the form, the input box is emptied automatically.
I still can't get used to this. So instead of clearing the field, you're clearing the model which clears the field?
Yes.
Crazy stuff.
Isn't it easier though?
It is, but not used to this. Make me a sandwich. Wow, that was so easy.
Also notice that all the numbers recalculated at the top.
Yes.
So you don't need to worry about that.
Oh, wait. What is this?
Well, nothing's perfect. How about we fix it?
Yeah, let's fix this. So,
Okay, so right now the problem is that when the input field is empty, we can still add new items to the array. So how about we disable the button when there's nothing?
ng disable?
Yes, so all buttons have a disabled property, disabled. And in order for us to data bind to this property, we're just going to use ng disabled, another custom attribute that we built for you. And we need the expression that, when evaluated, will set the disabled property on this button. Right, so we want to say that the input field is required.
Oh,
yeah.
input field required, yes.
So we want to say that input field is required, and this adds validation to our form. So what Angular will now start doing, it will require this, input field to contain something, and if it doesn't, it will create this validation model for the form, which you can bind to, data bind to. But in order to data bind to the validation model of the form, you need to name this form something. Well, what should we call it?
Something?
Now let's do new item, or new item form.
Okay.
That's fair.
So
So now
okay,
you can say new item form, capital F, dot $invalid. And that's a property that we automatically update for you whenever the validation rules within the form change. So whenever the input becomes valid or invalid, we will update this automatically for you.
I see, I can't click on that.
Right, so by default, because the input field is required, the validation rules say, hey, this form is invalid. But as soon as you start typing something into it, the validation constraint is not violated anymore, and the form is valid and button is enabled. Just think about what you would have to do if you wanted to do this imperatively with just DOM manipulation, by listening, by registering listeners on the input boxes, and then doing the DOM manipulation to disable or enable the form and just keeping everything in sync. With declarative templating, you can very easily and very readably just describe all these relationships and have Angular or the browser just do stuff for you.
So I have a confession to tell you. I wrote the backend in COBOL, and it only can take 15 characters. So
I'm out of here.
So we have max length in the browser, so and I have to limit it to 15.
Well, let's try that.
See,
so yeah, if you really
wait, what's happening?
Yeah, unfortunately, this is how HTML works. If you say max length is 15, it will just let you enter 15 characters. But wouldn't it be better if you could just finish a sentence and then think about how in Angular or the application, if an application told you that this is invalid, and you could just think about how you could change the input. So this is what ng max length allows you to do. So just by adding ng max length, you are telling Angular that this field should be validated using our custom validation routines, and as soon as the validation constraint on the input field is violated, we will add some CSS classes, which then you can use to style input fields. So if you look at the CSS, we have a CSS rule that says whenever you come across input field which contains ng-invalid-max length, just make it red. So that's how the input box becomes red. And the animation of the red disappearing and appearing is just Bootstrap being awesome.
But I noticed something else here is that because it now is invalid because of length, it automatically invalidates the form and prevents me from submitting it.
Of course.
So that's kind of for free, right? I don't have to press extra level of requirement in there.
Another validation that just hooks into the...
So this is good, but like we would really, as a user, I have no idea what's wrong, and I'd really like to see a message that says, hey, you typed too much. So how do I...
Are you going to tell the user that the backend is in COBOL?
Yes.
So I'll just tell the user that backend in COBOL. Okay, let's do that. So if you save it and refresh the browser, the error will show all the time. This is not what you want. You want to show the error conditionally. And what you can do is you can use ng-show to conditionally display this div or hide it. And in order to show it or hide it, you need to evaluate the expression. And the expression will just data bind to the validation model of the input field. And we already have the form named, but the input field doesn't have a name, so let's just call it new item. And then we can just say new item dot $error, which is the object that contains all the validation constraints that were violated, and max length is the name of the particular constraint.
I see. So it's red right now because it's telling us that it's required, but there's no error message for that. And then as I start typing, make me a sandwich, it becomes not only red, but it also is now showing me the error message. Yeah, I love that error message, man. That's awesome. That is maximum 15 characters, and as a user, I can change that, and of course, the form becomes invalid as well. You know, since you have to do so much work, I think it's time to give you some minions. What do you think about that?
Thank you very much.
All right.
I could appreciate
so if you look at the model, you see that there's a little bit of minions in there. So let's add item.minion. And so these tasks actually are just for other people. So really the way it works out, and this is really true in real life, is I work for him. So what I would like to do is I would like to add new things. And of course, if I add a new item, select something, and I hit add, there's no minion over there. So we have to...
We have to add something to our form so we can define who this minion is.
Okay, so that would be right after the input, I suppose?
Right after the error. Yeah.
Okay, so let's do a select box, right?
Select box, yeah.
Okay.
The select box will just specify all the team members. Wow, good job. So we have all the team members as options in our select box, and I see that you again two-way data bound the select box to new item.minion, and you said that the select box is required. So we're just adding more validation rules to our form.
So again, it's required, and so that's why we can't hit the add button. So let's add that, and voila, we can have that up there as well.
Right. So right now it didn't add the minion because we need to go back to the add method and just
thank you.
Fix up the logic there. Yep. New item.minion. Right. So when we are creating this new item object, now we also have the minion information.
Much better. Okay. But you know what I'd like to see? I'd like to see pictures. I'm a visual kind of a guy, and I want to see pictures instead of these names.
Okay, so let's just replace the plain name with some avatar.
Yes, let's do an avatar.
Do you have a particular template in mind that you would use for this?
I do. It's right here.
Whoa! Alrighty.
And there we go.
It looks pretty messed up right now.
It is a little messed up, right? I think what we're missing is that the image over here is data bound to the person's name, right here, and you know, we don't know who.
Okay, so we need to convert this name to a URL so that we know, so then we can fetch the image, right?
Yes. How do we do conversion?
We can use an Angular filter. So
you mean like in Unix?
Yeah, you can just use a pipe and just say avatar URL. And we're going to create this custom filter that will just pre-process the input before it's bound to the image.
Okay, how do I declare a filter?
Guess where would you define it?
I guess in my application, so it's to do app.
Yeah, take the model and just say filter.
Filter. I see. There's a method called filter over there.
Okay, so we're creating a filter. This filter is called avatar URL, just like what we are using in the template. And the definition of this filter just says, take the username, and take the image prefix, the username lowercase, and PNG postfix, and create one string out of this. And then, voila, the images are being loaded.
So, and I can choose somebody, right, and add. Oh, this is great. So, you know, the only thing is I'd like to put a name, a picture, instead of Igor over here. So let me cut and paste that piece of HTML. That's really nice.
What? Copy paste?
Yeah, no?
What are we? Visual Basics 101?
I'm still in COBOL, man.
You're still in COBOL. Okay, no copy pasting here. That's hard to maintain. How about we create a reusable component? Remember how I was talking about reusable components?
Okay.
So let's remove this and replace it with a custom element. Let's just call it avatar. And because we want to use it in multiple places, we need to drive it using some data. So it's going to take some input username, and in this case, we're going to bind it to item.minion because that's what we have in this context.
You're broken, man. It's gone.
It's gone because have you defined where the avatar is coming from and what it should look like?
I thought Angular could do everything. It's a superhero, no? All right, let's
There is
define
a little bit of work left for you too.
to do app dot
Directive. So Directive is the API that we use to define these custom elements. And what we are doing is we're saying we have this custom component called avatar. It's going to be used as a element, and as an input it has a username, and there is also a template associated with this custom element. So Angular, what it does when it comes across this custom element, it will find this definition of the custom element, it will pull the template, will inline it into this custom element, and will data bind it properly so that the end result is just like what we had originally, but now we have this, functionality, this component that we can then reuse over and over again.
Can I cut and paste the avatar?
You can copy paste it now.
Okay, but I have to change the binding, right?
Do you know what the name is?
I think it was username.
Yep. Awesome.
Wow, look at that.
So now we have a reusable component, and this is a very simple one, but we will show you some examples of more complex components that just make sense to build, because then you can just reuse them over and over.
So look, I'm going to add remember, and I'm going to refresh, and it forgets.
Is it your COBOL backend?
No, well, you did. I don't think we're calling it. Your tasks are not very persistent here. Ego's not persistent.
How about we not use COBOL? How about we use something more modern? What about MongoLab?
I was going to say, you're going to say SQL or something.
So we're going to store our data in MongoLab. MongoLab is just MongoDB in the cloud with a REST API in front of it. So what we need to do in our application, we need to make our model persistent. And the easiest way to do that is to define a resource in our application that is going to represent this item. So
what's a resource?
Resource, what is a resource?
Yes.
RESTful resource.
Oh, okay.
It's a component that just knows how to make HTTP calls to the server and allows you to just abstract the HTTP away from you.
So how do I declare a resource?
So in Angular, we're just going to define a generic service, and this is going to be done through a factory function. We're going to define a new component in Angular. This is a non-visual component that is going to be called item. And this definition is definition of this component, how to instantiate this component, is done through a factory function. And the factory function itself has some dependencies. So in this case, it is a $resource. And what we are using this $resource for is we're just going to generate a RESTful client. So $resource is a RESTful client generator. And just by providing URL and some other parameters, we can generate a generic RESTful client, which then we're going to customize further. We're not going to go into details of this code. But the most important point here is that we're going to return the instance that we generated. And this instance will be then available in our system wherever we need it. So we're going to need it in our controller, right?
Right, so I just grabbed it from some global space, right?
No, there is no global state in Angular applications. Global state is bad for maintainability as well as for testability. So Angular embraces dependency injection. This is something.
Dependency what?
Dependency injection.
Okay. What is that?
Dependency injection is very common. Is a very common practice in the server-side world. So many of you are probably familiar with Jews.
What is friends? The Java crowd. They know what DI is. Who knows what DI is?
Yeah. Look at that.
Nice.
That's more than half of the room.
That's true. That's true.
I don't remember audience that would be this knowledgeable
Okay.
about DI. So dependency injection is awesome, and even though nobody does it in JavaScript, we find that it really makes the applications easier to build and easier to maintain. Because what dependency injection allows you to do is to break up your application into smaller pieces that are well contained and just specific to, are focused on particular functionality, and then you can just use the small components and wire them up together to do something useful in your application. And the dependency injection, just by asking stuff and having it injected to your controller, for example, you don't need to worry about how do you instantiate this component and how do you instantiate the dependencies of this component. All of this is done for you, so there's really no need for having a main method in your application.
So how do I get this data? So I have this thing called item, which we declared already and was automatically injected. And then what do I do?
So item has a static method called query.
Like this?
Yeah, so we're just going to call query. This is going to make a HTTP GET request. It's going to fetch data from the backend server.
Wow, okay, I see that the backend already has some job over there.
Yep.
But explain to me, this, as a JavaScript guy, this looks like synchronous API. Like, what are you smoking?
So yeah, it does look like a blocking call, but that would be horrible because in JavaScript you just have a single thread. You don't want to do anything blocking because that will freeze the UI and the user cannot do anything and things are just bad. So what is actually happening behind the scenes here is that we're making a synchronous call, but right away we are returning an empty object or an empty array that is then data bound to the template. And even though it doesn't contain any data, the ng repeat or whatever binding you have will just ignore it until the data comes. And the data will eventually come from the server. And then the repeater will observe this change. We'll see that now the empty array contains data. It has 4 or 5 items. And it needs to go and stamp out all these copies of the li template that we had and data bind it properly.
So, but if I added a new task, which I did over here, and then I'm going to refresh this, I'm going to lose the data. So the persistence is not quite working yet. What else are we missing?
We just need to go to the add method and instantiate a new item and save it.
Okay.
Yeah, we can go.
What about the archive?
Save. This is going to make a post request to the server. And in the archive case, we're just going to check, is the item done? If it's done, then we're just going to call $remove, which will make a delete request to the server.
Okay, so let's give this a try. And refresh. Yay, it stays. And then archive, refresh, and it stays as well. Wow, so we got a basic to-do application working here.
Yep. So this was quite simple. But we talked about testability quite a bit. We talked about how Angular has dependency injection, how it doesn't have a main method, how data binding and how data binding helps you remove the presentation logic from the controller. Because if you look at the controller, what do you see there?
Actually, a better question, I think, is what I don't see over there is I don't see DOM, and I don't see any kind of Angular API or any kind of framework API all over the place. What happened to that?
This is done on purpose because we believe that in order to make applications really maintainable, they must be testable so that testing is easy. And in order to make testing easy, you have to follow some guidelines. And one of the guidelines in Angular is you never do DOM manipulation from the controller because the controller is really just for the business logic. If you follow this guideline, what you can do is you can test the controller without instantiating the view, which makes testing of the controller really easy because you're focusing only on testing the business logic of your application rather than on this mix, the spaghetti code of business logic and the presentation logic that forces you to instantiate a template and just makes everything really messy and difficult.
Okay, so I see that we already have a Jasmine test. How many people are familiar with Jasmine? Big fans of Jasmine? Wow, it's another good crowd over there. And so this is a Jasmine test, and there's things in there like before each describe, and in this case we're describing the app controller. A couple more before each, which we'll cover in a second. Specifically, we're going to describe the add functionality of the app controller, and specifically, it should add new tasks. Now, this is where it gets interesting, I think, because I'm sure you're familiar with the expecs, but we actually extended the behavior of Jasmine by adding dependency injection into it as well. So inside of the before each, we can ask for.
Right, so what we are doing is we are just saying every time you run any of the tests, load the to-do app controller. This will load all of the component definitions, but it's not going to instantiate anything because instances of these components are instantiated only at the time when they are requested.
And so this is another interesting piece. It basically says that you can magically pull instances out of thin air into your application, which means you don't have to build subsections of your application in
Exactly,
in
so you're just requesting the dependency injector. You are requesting to have instances of these components injected into your test. And this will cause dependency injector to look up these components and see, do I have it already or do I need to instantiate it? If I need to instantiate, do I have all the dependencies that I need to instantiate this component? If I don't, then I have to go and instantiate the dependencies before I can instantiate whatever is it that I started with. But eventually you will get all these instances and then you can just use them. So think about all this work you typically have to do without dependency injection, where you have to instantiate all this entire object graph and figure out the dependencies. And in a big application, this usually ends up in the main method, which is super messy and hard to maintain. With dependency injection, all of this is gone. all of this is gone, and you really can easily break up the application into smaller pieces.
Wait, did I understand you correctly? Did you just imply that Angular applications have no main methods?
Yeah, there's no main method.
How could you have an application without a main method?
Dependency injection takes care of that.
Wow.
So in this particular test, we are making HTTP requests to the server. Now, writing a unit test that would require the server to be running every time you want to run the test, it would be just crazy. So what dependency injection allows us to do is to mock out dependencies. So in this case, we are saying, oh, before any of the tests within this block are instantiated, we are gonna replace the resource definition of the item service with a mock item. In this case, the APIs are the same, so we still have the $remove, $save, and query methods, just like we had in the real service definition, but they are replaced with spies, so they don't make requests to the server. They are just spies, which you can then verify, did the controller try to make the request to the server or not.
Let's run this stuff, man, and keep talking about it. So Jasmine requires an index HTML file to kind of run this stuff, so let's write the index HTML file, right?
No.
No?
So typically, the way this is done is you have index.html, which will load all the scripts, and then you have this HTML-based runner, which will just show all the tests and see which ones are passing or not. This works for smaller projects, and if you are willing to be distracted and switching between your IDE and the browser all the time, but we thought that we could do better. So we created this test runner, which we called Testacular. It's a spectacular test runner. And what it does, it focuses only on the task of executing JavaScript. So in this case, it will take the Jasmine test. It can also run other tests, not just Jasmine tests. But in this case, we are loading Jasmine's tests in a real browser. So Misko started Testacular in the background. It's a node-based server. It's not tied to Angular or WebStorm or anything. You can use it in any other project where you need to test JavaScript. And Testacular started Chrome, real browser, because we think testing against real browser is really, really important rather than having fake browsers. What we are doing here is Testacular will observe the file system, and every time we change any of the source code or the test code, it will run the test for us automatically. So what we see here is just by changing the test definition and saving the file, Testacular runs the test and tells us, hey, this is failing or this is passing. So you can really focus on just writing the test. And this just adds to the story of Angular of making the applications easier to test. So, but let's look at the test. What is the test doing?
Well, it looks like it's getting hold of the scope items because we published the items earlier. It's verifying that at the start they're 0. It then goes and adds an item into the task because it simulates the form which we had the new item text property by saying this is a fake task. And then we're asserting that the item's length is now 1 and the first item in the array is the fake task. And notice that whenever I change anything and hit save, the test execute at the bottom. The other thing I want to point out is just the speed of execution. We're talking about it here is fraction of a second. This is way faster than what you can do with Alt-Tab, Alt-R, look at the results and then Alt-Tab. There's no break in your continuity. You're just spending your whole time inside of your IDE.
So with Angular, we use Testacular heavily, and we have a test suite of 1,600 unit tests, which verify that all of the DOM manipulation, all this craziness that we do to make browsers smarter, just works. And we are able to run all of the 1,600 unit tests under 3 seconds in Chrome or Safari. So this really allows us to run an entire test suite every time we save, and that just changes the way you develop. You think about developing. And you really take the test-driven approach of building code because it's just so easy. It just makes sense to do it that way.
Okay, so I think we covered all the pieces and maybe doing some questions and answers.
Do you want to show the second application?
Oh yes, I totally forgot.
So the to-do application doesn't really allow us to show all the pieces of Angular. It allows us to show the basic concepts. But we also built a bigger application that we used for a workshop here on Tuesday. The application, maybe you can just walk through it and see what it does?
Yeah, so it allows you to order food online, right? So you can decide where you are, who you are. So you set a list of restaurants nearby. Then you can rate you can select a subset of the restaurants by price or rating. You can select a specific cuisine. and so on. And once you have a particular item, a restaurant in mind, you can look at its menu. You can add items.
You have to remove this.
Oh, sorry.
Yep, kill this.
Oh. You can add items into your shopping cart. You can check out, fill in your information. Don't look at the column. It's my credit card.
Is that a corporate card?
Yes, but don't tell them. And you can purchase, and we'll have a little confirmation. And then the typical things that work in an application that you would expect is that the back buttons work the way you would expect. Similarly, the forward button should work the way you would expect. Deep linking, should be able to cut and paste the URL and mail it to somebody. And I think Igor is going to tell you how we built this.
Yeah, so let's look how this routing and navigation works. So in Angular, we have several services. One of them is this routing service, which allows you to just say that I have all these views in my application, and these views are tied to a URL. So let's see what this definition of this looks like. So we have a FoodMe app, which is another module, the main module for our application. And within this module, we are defining configuration function. This configuration function is, of course, dependency injected with whatever it needs. In this case, it's a route provider. And this route provider allows us to define routes. So what we are doing here is we're saying, hey, when the URL in the browser is / instantiate a controller and fetch this template if you don't already have it in the template cache, and bind the two together and display it to the user. Now the question might be, where is it displayed? So let's look at the index.html. So in index.html, this is just like in a to-do app application, regular HTML which pulls scripts, CSS, but it also has a block of HTML that is common for all of the views in our application. And it also has this placeholder element called ngView. And these views that we define in routes will be inlined into these custom elements. So this is this is how you can do routing in your application, how you can split bigger application that can have dozens of view into smaller pieces and then just pull them in as you need them.
Questions?
Yeah. Do people have any questions? We'll be happy to answer
Well, actually,
some.
I have a question. First of all, there's these nice T-shirts over here and stickers. What do we do with them? I don't want to drag them back.
Maybe we should give them away to people?
But there's a lot more people than shirts.
How about questions?
For good questions?
Yeah. Anybody has a good question?
The crowd is eager.
Okay. Is it possible to load Angular application as an asynchronous module with the require.js? So this is something that we come and see. Require.js takes solves the problem of loading code. Solves the problem of loading code, while dependency injection in Angular solves the problem of instantiating instances. So the answer is yes, you can use the two together. But you have two layers that you have to work with, and in an Angular application, it's not often necessary to use require.js.
I'd also like to point out that the two really deal with different things. Require talks about how do I load code into the JavaScript VM, and Angular module system talks about how do I instantiate classes inside of the VM. So it's a slightly different
So they can be
goal.
complementary. If you build an application that really needs all this functionality, you can use the two together.
Okay, so I think we're going to be on an honor system here, and like after the talk, come and get your shirt. And there's more
Other
questions. I
questions?
know.
Just shout out. Try another question.
That gentleman over there, yes? How do you keep static pages while doing internationalization? I think the idea is that you would internationalize the templates for yourself. We do have support for localization information, such as printing numbers in different formats for different countries, dates, currencies, and so on. But the bulk of the translation, you just have to serve up different templates for us.
Right.
What browsers are supported?
What browsers? Everybody always asks that question.
We run a continuous integration server on Firefox, Safari, Chrome, Chrome Canary, IE8, IE9, and we also test on mobile browsers. Here in front.
There are these three offerings from Google, Dart, Angular, and GWT.
Okay.
So what's the story behind this? Can
GWT versus Dart versus AngularJS.
Yes.
What's going
Okay.
on? Yeah.
So I think it's important to look at history of it, and so GWT was one of the first things. GWT, it was also takes the approach that the reason why it's difficult to build applications is because of the language, and Dart is a variation on that because it says, well, maybe if you just fix the language, we'll have it again. But AngularJS takes a different approach, and basically it says you could actually use, in theory, AngularJS with any transcompiling language. Like I know people use it with CoffeeScript and TypeScript. And so the AngularJS basically says that the issue why applications are hard to build is because the abstraction level is wrong. And so over the many years that these projects came into be, Google is a large company, and so we tried different things, and this is just our multi-headed approach to this particular problem.
I don't think anybody has a perfect answer to all the problems, and we're just trying different strategies and seeing who gets closer to the perfect world. And we'll see who gets there sooner or who even ever gets there. So.
Okay, I think we should get a question from the back, like way over there on the back.
Way in the back.
Yes.
I have a question about routing and the history API. Is there a support for it?
Routing and history APIs. Yes. So the routing service actually can transparently switch. If you configure it to use the history APIs, it will switch and will start using the HTML5 history APIs. This requires some work on the server because you need to do URL rewriting, but we definitely do support it. So if you want it to opt in, then you can use it.
What about debugging?
Debugging.
Debugging. Ooh, yes.
So
give the man a T-shirt.
Come get a T-shirt.
Well, at the end with everybody else.
So debugging, we allow you to use existing debugging tools. Chrome debugger is pretty awesome. You can introspect the elements. You can actually get hold of the model by just clicking on any of the element in the view. And we thought that we could do even better just by using existing tools. How about we just write an extension for Chrome? And that's what we did. If you go to Chrome Web Store, there is an extension waiting for you called AngularJS Batarang, just like Batman's tool. And this Batarang will add more tabs to the web inspector in Chrome that you can use to debug Angular applications. You can see how this model is bound to the view. You can see some performance characteristics of bindings and see if you have any performance issues where they're coming from, so you can focus your attention to the right piece of code. And dependency injection will also show you how these pieces are wired together. So this is a very valuable tool when you're debugging Angular applications. Another question?
Current level of IDE support?
IDE support. We're actually talking to several IDE vendors who are very interested in Angular support. WebStorm already has reasonably good support for Angular attributes. So one thing we didn't really talk about is many people ask us about validness of templates. And Misko showed that you can actually write all of the custom attributes that we build with just data dash prefix, which if you care about validity of the template, we just transparently support that as well.
Or X dash data. I mean X.
X, yeah. So, but yes, we're working with browser with IDE vendors to have a better support. WebStorm is probably currently the best IDE to use Angular with.
I like the green shirt over there, man. We should ask him.
How would you compare yourself to Knockout.js?
Knockout.js is a very interesting project. Actually, when we first learned about Knockout, it was the first version, which was very different from the second version. The second version of Knockout is sort of similar in many of the things that happen under the hood with Angular. The major differences are that Knockout is really just a library, templating library, whereas Angular is a whole framework. Knockout.js forces you to wrap all your models into Knockout observables. So which are these proxies, these are wrappers that you always have to deal with, and you have to put your model into and wrap it out of these wrappers when you want to send it to the server. And it doesn't have all the functionality that Angular gives you. Like we think about the whole picture of how to build an application, not just how to do templating with HTML.
Right, you couldn't do this, right? You just can't have a naked model like this in the other frameworks.
Other questions? I think we are out of time. So
okay.
Let me take one more question. A quick question?
Does the use of Dart web components make use of AngularJS optional?
You mean Dart components?
Web
components.
Web components. So will web components make AngularJS obsolete? We don't think so. We think there will always be need to have a syntactic sugar on top of these primitives that are coming to the browser. So there will always be a role for AngularJS. We are just hoping that AngularJS will become thinner by pushing all the stuff that we currently do in JavaScript into the browser.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much. We're going to hang around. If you have questions, come ask us. If you want a t-shirt, just come and get it.
And I'm supposed to tell you to exit through that door.
Yeah.
Apparently it's a lot quicker.
Yeah.
You're welcome.